Alexandra Cousteau not only carries her famous family name around, she carries the Cousteau charisma and passion for the environment. She was just 4 months old when she left on her first expedition with her father, Philippe. She is a National Geographic explorer and the founder of Blue Legacy. It is my pleasure to welcome Alexandra Cousteau to Studio 4 to tell us more.
Hi, Fanny.
Well, 4 months old, unless you're a complete genius, you don't remember much about that first expedition.
I don't, but they got me started early. You know, before we went on expedition, I started my swimming lessons. Mm-hmm. I was water safe before I could walk. And,
I bet you were.
I spent the first 4 years on expedition, traveling around the world, and it was a great way to start. I think even though I don't remember a lot of it, it really laid the foundation for who I've become.
I was wondering if your brother, Philippe Jr., is involved too in saving oceans.
Absolutely.
I bet he is.
He is.
And then I was wondering if anybody in the family is afraid of water.
No, actually we can't get enough of it.
I'm sure not. Tell me about the Blue Legacy Project.
Well, Blue Legacy is an initiative that we started in 2008, and it's really meant to tell the story of our water planet. You know, that when I got back to the United States from Central America, where I'd been living for 2 years working on marine protected areas, I realized that we have a tendency to think of our water resources as fragmented. We think of a lake being over here and a river being over there and our coastal zones being there, and we forget that we actually live in a system, in a water system, and that water shapes our land, it shapes our experience of the world that we live in, and we need to start thinking about our water as a system if we're going to protect it.
No kidding, and as humans, our liver is our future. As a planet, water is our future.
Absolutely.
When you think what goes on in the oceans or what's happening in our wild rivers and our streams with everything from pollution to people taking too much water out.
Absolutely, and that's one of the big questions. You know, we need to start thinking about water, I think, in 3 ways. We need to think about water from the perspective of the quality of our water and our impacts on water. We need to think about our quantity of water, how we manage the water that we have. Many of our great rivers, like the Colorado River, no longer reach the sea. And
that is astounding to me. And I
amazing.
lived in the state of Colorado, and I've been on the Colorado, and it's a magnificent river. So when you say it no longer reaches the sea, because of management, because people are exhausting the supply up high, or what's going on in the Colorado River is the question.
Well, the Colorado River is a fascinating river. You know, it's over 1,200 miles long. It's carved the geography of the American Southwest, but it's also shaped the history and the culture of that region. And it used to flow into Mexico, and there was this delta the size of Rhode Island. And it had cottonwood forests and wetlands, and it was a stopover for migratory birds, and there were fish and turtles and big cats and deer that lived there, and it went from one mountain range to the next. It was just extraordinary. And because we've over-allocated the water resources in the United States and in Mexico, so that we could divert water into the desert to grow cheap lettuce and fruit, so that we can have green grass in the desert, so we can make the desert bloom.
Water hazards on the golf course, perhaps.
Exactly. And
green grass on the golf courses of Arizona.
Which is ironic. And so the water just doesn't flow into the delta anymore, and that delta is now a salted desert where nothing can grow. The fisheries that used to thrive in the Sea of Cortez and the Gulf of California have pretty much dried up. People have lost not only their work, but the legacy of a whole way of life. And it's devastating. So, you know, the way we manage our water, the quality of our water really matters. But if we're going to fix those problems, we have to think about it in terms of the watershed, in terms of the system that manages and protects our water resources.
Sure, the wetlands, the sacred waters of the north. I don't know if you've had the pleasure of going to the Spatsizi in Canada's north, where the Nass and the Stikine meet. It's magnificent. And as you know, we're a resource extracting people, and of course, you know, we need copper and minerals, but we have to think about where the mines are and what's happening.
You know, and I'm a big believer, you know, that we don't have to destroy our natural world in order to have progress in our society. I think too often we think that we have to make sacrifices, and we need to, you know, come to terms with the fact that in order to to have progress and prosperity as a community, as a society, then we're going to have to destroy parts of our environment. And I don't think that's true. I think that there's ways to do everything that we need to do. We can have sustainable fisheries. We can work on making our mines more sustainable and making sure that they're placed in places where they're not going to destroy natural treasures. And we can continue to progress as a society without undermining the wealth of natural resources upon which our health really depends.
And continue to educate about why we need the ocean, down to the plankton.
Yeah.
Do you study oceans a lot, like coral reefs and dead zones and things like that?
I've spent a lot of time investigating those issues, and the truth is, when I think back to when my grandfather got started 70 years ago with the Silent World, the oceans were completely unknown. 70% of our planet was something that was a mystery to most people. They knew the ocean as waves crashing on a beach or as this vast surface, but everything underneath was completely unknown. And in the 70 years since my grandfather started exploring the oceans and making his films, we've learned more about the oceans than ever before, and that knowledge we take for granted, and there's books and photos and films that have been made. But we've also lost more of the oceans than ever before in human history in just that short span of time. And it's critical that we start to all take responsibility for protecting that resource.
As a little girl, did you get to sit down with Grandpa?
Yeah,
with grandfather and have
absolutely.
conversations about more than water?
Yeah. He was magic, and he wasn't a marine biologist. He was a Navy in the French, captain
military.
in the French Navy. Absolutely, he traveled the world that way. He invented the aqualung, and he was part of the French Resistance. And part of his cover in the French Resistance was with his professional diving card. So they would go look for mines on the bottom of boats, and the Germans would come over, and he'd say, "Hey, we're just doing some research. Would you like to have a look?" And the Germans would think, "Oh, this is so beautiful. Great, continue your important work."
Yes.
And that was really what he did. And then when he left the Navy, of course, he got Calypso, and they started their explorations. But he was also a philosopher and a poet and an artist. He was a painter. He played the accordion.
He played the accordion.
He did, like a good Frenchman.
He did.
Yes, he did.
How great.
Yeah, and he taught me to dive when I was 7. And I had a tiny little mask and tiny little suspenders with a tiny little tank and my little fins, and went up to the side of the boat, and absolutely terrified.
I'm sure, but that's something.
He pushed me in.
Who taught you to dive? Jacques Cousteau.
And he changed my world.
How did he change your father's world?
Well, my father actually learned to dive when he was 4 years old, and was the inspiration for the title of my grandfather's first film and book, The Silent World, because when my grandfather took my father diving, my father was so excited about what he was seeing, the fish, the corals, the seaweed, that he kept trying to say something to my grandfather, exclaiming and pointing and talking. My grandfather had to keep putting the regulator back in his mouth so he wouldn't drown.
Yeah.
And when they got back on board the ship, my grandfather admonished my father, saying, "Philippe, you can't talk underwater. It's a silent world." And that's where he got the name for his book and his film. But I think they were soulmates in so many ways and worked so closely together.
And your dad left so young.
He did.
How old was he when he was killed?
He was 39.
39.
Very young.
Wow.
The older I get, the younger it seems.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Boating accident, right?
It was a plane accident.
Plane
actually.
boating.
He had an amphibious plane, a PBY, and he used that for his expeditions. It held a crew of 9, and they traveled around the world with it. And it was in Lisbon getting repaired. And he was doing a test flight on the Taos River. And they hadn't repaired it properly, because when it landed, the landing gear didn't lock into place and the plane broke apart. And unfortunately, my father lost his life.
Who helped you get over that? I'm sure you helped you get over that, but...
Well, my mother kept, for both my mother was 3 months pregnant with my brother when the accident happened, but she is an extraordinary woman, and with great courage and conviction, she kept him alive for us, and his example really, and his example not only of what he accomplished in his work, but his integrity and the convictions that he had, the dreams that he had, the reasons that he did what he did. really were an inspiration for me, and are still. Everything I do with a great sense of responsibility, both to his memory and to the work that he left behind.
If you did nothing with water, do you have another passion?
You know, I think if I didn't do what I do, I'd probably still be a storyteller, a photojournalist, working, you know, if it wasn't environmental issues, it would be women's issues or war photography or something like that.
Well, this is a war of sorts, isn't it? The Great Lakes, for instance. I did not realize that 90% of North America's fresh water, is this true? 90% of North America's fresh water is in the Great Lakes?
It is. It's a great treasure. It's a great treasure. And, you know, both Canadians and Americans could do a much better job of protecting it.
Why? What are we doing wrong at this point?
Well,
key issues.
There's legacy issues with industries, polluting industries from the past. There's a lot of urban runoff from major cities. There's invasive species. There's wetlands destruction. Marshes are being bulldozed to put in condominiums. And again, it's not about preventing progress, but it's about being able to progress sustainably.
Sure.
And
urban encroachment.
Absolutely. And a lot of it is sewage. You know, there's a lot of raw sewage going into the Great Lakes. Lake Ontario is a lake that is such a treasure, but you know, when we were in Toronto, we realized that so many people in Toronto just turned their back on it because they assume that it's gone, that it's polluted, you can't eat the fish, you can't recreate, you don't want to swim in it, and so they sort of turned their back on it. And there's a lot that can be done to clean it up and make it viable again.
Well, as you know, city rivers, the Hudson, for instance, I know Bobby Kennedy Jr. has done
what an incredible guy.
Yeah, a lot of revival of the Hudson. Maybe that's why there was a miracle on the Hudson. Do you think when they landed when he landed that plane? I think
Bobby
Sully
Kennedy
landed
Jr.
the plane on the Hudson.
Well,
that was a good day.
I think they've made a lot of miracles happen. The water keepers are just incredible. And you have one here in Vancouver. You have a water keeper.
We do?
Yeah, the Fraser River Keeper.
Oh, right. Yes.
And the Vancouver Aquarium, they're doing so much work on sustainable seafood.
On sustainable seafood and all of that. And Rick Hansen, who is a great fan of the sturgeon, don't you know? He's done a lot for the Fraser River. Take me to the Gulf States in the Tennessee Valley. What's going on there?
Oh, gosh, it's really tragic. And you know, I think one of the really important things that we need to do as a society is to never allow one generation to destroy what ought to be a multi-generational asset like water. We have to pass water along to our children in the state that we got it. And in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Tennessee Valley, we've done a dismal job of it.
Sure.
The Gulf of Mexico, it'll take, I think, generations before it is back to where it was. And mistakes like that don't need to happen.
Well, water will be the defining issue. My grandfather always said the last battles will be fought over water.
Yeah.
I hope they won't.
Well, certainly what is so heartbreaking, and the same goes for the coal ash spill in the Emery River in Tennessee, is that you have families, you have people who, you know, in Louisiana and Alabama, people have been fishermen for 7 generations. They learned at their father's knees how to do this, and that's gone.
Sure, the
that's
sustainer of life, water. So we need to shape the dialogue around it, and I know you do that at National Geographic. Do you know my friend Wade Davis by any chance?
Absolutely.
Well, tell him hi.
I will.
He was just here.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
He
I love
sure is.
Wade. And he's a big water champion for you guys here in Canada.
Yes, he is. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank
you, Fanny.
Alexandra Cousteau.